So it's my pleasure to introduce the three panelists that we have today and to talk about reinventing high school. First of all, I'm going to miss Colleen because I've called him representative for a number of months, but he is now Senator Rich Crandall. Rich Crandall has served in the Arizona State Legislature since 2007 and has been Education Chairman for the last 2 years. Emboldened by his leadership, Arizona is tackling the status quo head-on with new student-centered education reform programs like Move On When Ready, which he's going to talk to us about today. Sharing the belief that reform is never finished, in his coming term, Senator Crandall has set his sights on junior high dropout rates, as well as district consolidations, teacher evaluations, and expanding access to career and technical education courses. In his day job, he is president and CFO of Crandall Corporate Dietitians, which is the nation's largest consulting dietitian firm for nursing homes, assisted living communities, and hospitals. He also leads CN Resource, a company which oversees USDA child nutrition programs in 14 states. Senator Crandall's passion for education comes from the heart. He and his wife, Teresa, have 7 children, 6 girls and 1 boy. So we welcome you, Senator Crandall. Secondly, and on my left is Colleen Englert. Colleen leads the Florida Ready to Work program. She's the executive director there. It's an innovative workforce development tool that is helping close the talent gap in Florida. In just 3 years, over 90,000 Florida Ready to Work credentials have been issued. The research shows that credential earners are getting hired faster and are earning more than those without the credential. And the program is producing double-digit reductions in hiring, training, and turnover costs for employers. Colleen has more than 20 years of experience in policy, marketing, and project management, and it's across industry sectors from education to healthcare. She served as Chief of Staff for the Florida Department of Management Services under Governor Jeb Bush, and she has helped grow the Florida Prepaid College Plan into the largest program of its kind with more than 1 million users statewide. Welcome, Colleen. Last, we have Hanna Skandera. And Hanna is the CEO of Laying the Foundation. It's a model national training program for teachers of English, math, and science in grades 6 through 12. Hanna previously served as Executive Vice President of Academic Partnerships in Dallas, Texas, an organization supporting the delivery of online programs for colleges and universities. Hanna also served as Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Policy Advisor to Secretary Margaret Spellings of the U.S. Department of Education, Deputy Commissioner for Education under Governor Jeb Bush, and Undersecretary of Education for California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. She has authored and edited numerous books and papers, including School Figures, The Data Behind the Debate. Hanna is going to brief us today on the Texas Virtual School Network College Readiness Initiative. Welcome, Hanna. Thank you for being here. We're going to start with Senator Crandall, and we're going to ask him to please get us started by telling us about Move On When Ready.
I am the thorn among the roses up here. I already had a self-esteem problem. Last night, got a call from my church, and they do a big Christmas breakfast every year, and guess who canceled on them yesterday? Santa. And so they said, Senator Crandall, you fit the suit. Will you be Santa this year? And I've been trying so hard to lose some weight. I'm going to go through this very quickly. I've never, these are a couple of slides that I share with folks around Arizona, but never have I had, the President McGraw-Hill in the audience and Apex and people who already are about 90% through what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to go through quickly with this so you understand why we passed this very, very significant piece of high school legislation. We have, so I just want to recognize real quick, our incoming state superintendent, Senator John Huppenthal, has been our Senate Education Chair. This legislation would not have passed without him. I was the House Education Chair. He was in the Senate. It made a great team. And then Steve Court. Steve, if you'll raise your hand, one of our representatives who sat on the Education and Appropriations Committee that helped move this through. Go through real fast in Arizona. When do Arizona high school students take their graduation exam? Sophomore year. Do most pass it the first time in Arizona? Yes. What is the disaster that comes from giving your high school graduation exam sophomore year and everybody passing it the first time? Not a great recipe for rigor and success. How many other states use the AIMS exam? Well, it's the Arizona Instrument for Measuring Standards, so I'm going to guess none. So who do we benchmark ourselves against? Against ourselves. And you know, we're kicking tail. We're doing great. One other big thing, I used to be the school board president for, our largest district is Mesa, Arizona, 66,000 students. This is something that was always my pet peeve. I can't wait until my senior year because, I'm curious as how your states might finish this sentence, but in Arizona, it is because I get out at 11:30. Forget that I could take AP, college courses, rigor, electives. Forget that I could do all that for free. I just want out at 11:30. And that's the culture that we had created over the last several years because we gave our graduation exam sophomore year and most passed it the first time. We as state policy leaders are responsible for the sorry state of things in high school in Arizona. But I want to give one little caveat. What state has the lowest percentage of students taking a college entrance exam? Once again, we do. Of students who take the ACT or SAT, we have the lowest percentage because our 3 universities don't require it. Plus also we have the lowest matriculation rate from high school to college. So in Arizona, who is taking the ACT or the SAT? Well, it's those kids who are going to your states from Arizona to go to college. I have a daughter who's at BYU who took the ACT. So here's one little problem we have in Arizona. Our top 20% of students in Arizona can hang with anybody, your top students. We know that because they're at great universities. They get great scholarships. Our bottom 20 are probably the same as your bottom 20. No matter what we try, we can't get them to put some effort into high school. So where were we failing with that 60%? What incentive do we provide a 7th grader who passes all of his exams? What reward do we give him? Maybe the same that you do. We give him 8th grade. And if he passes 8th grade, what do? We give him 9th grade. There are no incentives to move forward quickly and to learn at your own pace. Here we are real quick. This is the ACT, SAT. Those 3 states are the worst, and who's the worst among those 3? Arizona, as far as college entrance exams. We flat out just don't take it. I'm gonna put this up there for just a second so you can see what we're competing against. And this is what Senator Huppenthal and I saw as we were moving forward. Hey, we're just not doing great. What can we do to change this? Back up for a quick second. So long story short, we decide, hey, let's do a pilot project. Let's give the ACT to several thousand students, 30,000 students, and see what happens. So we applied with one of our foundations, got $700,000 to give 31,000 students the ACT over 2 years. Picked 8 school districts, Phoenix, Mesa, Peoria, 8 districts, and gave them the ACT and said, let's see what happens. And this is the results. Pay attention just to the 8 on the far left side first. You see our average scores. Mesa, that Steve and I represent, had the highest at an average of 19.5. Well, many of your states, there's now 8 states that test 100% of their students with the ACT. Then there's numerous other states that at least 80% of their students take the ACT. So we have a very good core group to compare ourselves against. Now, if you were to ask anybody what are the 2 worst school districts in America, the answer you typically get, I question, this audience knows more than most of my audiences do about education in the U.S., but typically you get DC and Detroit. I got to live in inner city Detroit for 2 years at age 19, so I know it pretty well. Phoenix Union School District, you see, has an average of 15.7. Very, very good district, meaning an IB program, a bioscience high school, specialty high schools, AP courses, just a great district. But when it comes to their ACT score, they almost tie Detroit. Why? And they're also the highest paid teachers in the state of Arizona. Why is that the case? Because they've taken their sophomore high school graduation exam and they've all passed it. So they've been cruising for junior, senior year. We know that we need a new model. This is a little difficult to see, but this is what ACT gives for every district. A little composite, 1 to 36 over here on the right. Just pay attention to this composite column. How many kids scored a 36? None. 35, none. 34, none. 3 students scored a 33. Out of 4,133 students tested in the Phoenix Union School District 2 years ago, it was every single junior in Phoenix Union, 3 score 33. Well, let's start at 28. 28 is kind of an average ACT for some of the top universities. 10 plus 7, 17, 22, 28, 29. 32 kids score a 28 or higher out of 4,133. That was the big shocker to us in Arizona. These are bright kids, but they have given up. Now, what's the correlation when you have kids who cruise for junior, senior year? What comes next? We have one of the nation's highest college remediation rates because we've been cruising for 2 years. So there's lots of problems that can be solved, and here's what we came up with. This is our little bell curve, our ACT. I'm mortified that our peak is at a 14. That's not a great, those of us at BYU think that that's like the U of U average ACT score right there. So here's what we came up with. It's called Move On When Ready. Basically, we just said, okay, we're going to give a series of board exams. I've got to give a shout out to Mark Tucker because his group here in DC has been working on this for a long time. He brought his model to Arizona. We took it, tweaked it quite a bit to fit Arizona, but Mark was one of the big driving forces behind this. We said, okay, you're going to come into 9th grade, and we're going to give a series of board exams. You're going to have a 2-year curriculum with board exams. There's ACT Quality Core. There's Cambridge out of England. There is Edexcel, a Pearson subsidiary. You're going to go for 2 years. You're going to take this curriculum. At the end of those 2 years, you're going to have a series of board exams. And these are projects, papers, bubble tests, all of it. It's not just a couple of 10 true-false questions. Very rigorous exams. And that red line right there is the entry to open entry college with no remediation. So no more remediation in Arizona. If you pass the exams at that level, you are, for all intents and purposes, a high school graduate now in the state of Arizona. At first, people were kind of shocked. Oh, we don't want 10th graders out there. But when you remind them, those 10th graders are significantly higher academically than our seniors are today, then they kind of back off a little bit. But we do have a problem. We don't want a bunch of 16-year-olds on our college campuses. I'll be honest about that. I've got 6 daughters. I'm not real excited about them taking off at age 16. So what we do is we negotiated with our athletic AIA, Arizona Interscholastic Association, Student Council, everything, and said, hey, you're going to be basically dual enrolled. And I shouldn't use that term because that's not what I mean. You are a high school graduate, but you're going to stay on your high school campus and take your college courses. The colleges will come to you, but you still get to go to the prom. You still get to be in football. You still get to do student council, band, choir, all those things that make for a great high school experience, but you are taking 100% college courses. Your goal is to finish with 30 to 60 college credits. Now, we say move on when ready because not everyone's going to pass in 10th grade. It may be 2nd semester of junior year. It could be 1st semester of senior year. It doesn't necessarily matter. We just want you to be motivated on your own to pass this. This is where we are right now. Now, why digital curriculum is so critical to us is it's going to be very difficult to get the critical mass to do this at every high school around Arizona. We are a very large state with rural areas everywhere. What if only 3, I grew up in rural Arizona, what if only 3 kids in my high school pass the Move On When Ready? We call it the Grand Canyon Diploma, is what we call it. What if it's only 3 kids? Well, no community college is going to bring a teacher for 3 kids. So we have some online colleges that are fantastic in Arizona. They are developing a high school curriculum for those students. But there's no reason we couldn't take other universities and colleges outside of Arizona and have them give our kids deliver college content. So in a nutshell, that is what Move On When Ready is, and that's what we're doing. So.
Thank you, Senator Crandall. Colleen is going to present for us next, and she's going to tell us how we can replicate Florida Ready to Work in our states.
Just let me put this down, what do you think? All right, cool. Good morning. I guess it's still morning. In the Washington Post this week, there was an article that kind of caught my eye, and the headline said, "Call to boost training of skilled workers and technicians." And a couple of the excerpts in the article talks about more than 40% of enterprises are facing a staff shortage with skilled workers and technicians, the most needed employees over the next 5 years. The problem is not that we lack workers. The core issue is that we are short of skilled workers. And that is the foundation upon which the Florida Ready to Work program was built. It is just yesterday, we all sat together and talked to 6 CEOs representing a very broad section of our business and industry. And what we heard from them is what they need from education. We heard things like foundational skills, problem-solving skills, reasoning. We need people that can think critically, that can be lifelong learners. So as my business changes over time, they can continue to learn and be able to adapt to my changing workplace. We heard about them needing soft skills, those skills that we should be learning at home, but don't always. And in this world, it's the coming to work on time, being able to converse in an effective and responsible way. Again, that was the genesis for Florida Ready to Work. The business community in Florida, and I'm sure across the country, is driving a lot of the change that we are making today. In Florida, the disconnect was often the business community going to educators, and I know this was a frustrating and continues to be a frustrating element of reform for educators, saying we need more math, because that was one of the things we heard yesterday. And so we passed laws saying that everybody must have Algebra 1, or we start charging forward and offering more math. We need folks that can read and write. We heard that yesterday again. Well, gosh, we've been elevating the standards, and we're teaching Shakespeare, and yes, we're teaching more, critical thinking and problem solving and reading, but why do we still hear our CEOs, granted we still have a way to go, talking about needing things that we think we're delivering? So Florida Ready to Work, again, the concept was how can we start bridging the gap, because there does seem to be a gap between what business thinks it needs and what the education system is delivering. And it really is kind of a communication issue. What we have all found is that we really are talking about the same stuff. We're talking about the same 4 functions of math, but being able to apply that in a practical workplace context. So it's being able to calculate a percentage markup or discount. That's the 4 functions of math. That's not trigonometry. Now, there is a place for trigonometry, but it is those critical thinking skills that you learn in the algebra classroom or calculus that will help carry you into the workplace no matter what you're going to do. Whether you're a barista at Starbucks, or you are the CPA, accounting, CFO for a large multi-global corporation, you have to have math skills. It's at what level on that continuum you must be able to understand and apply the math that you're learning in the classroom. So Florida Ready to Work essentially has 4 key components. We deliver online courseware in 9 critical skill areas, again, the skill areas we're teaching in the classroom, but with a different spin, with a workplace spin. So again, we're looking at things like, I work in a tire store, I'm the manager, and the corporate office decides we're going to have a 10% off holiday sale, and we're also going to have a corporate, if you sign up for our corporate credit card program, you get another 15% off, being able to do that math. Or very simply, I'm the office manager for a small, 10, 15-person company, and my boss walks in, and on the radio this morning he heard about some new cell plan, and he asked me to evaluate whether or not that cell plan was going to be more cost efficient than the one we got. We're not talking about calculus, we're talking about applied math skills and being able to, again, problem solve in a productive way. So our courseware does focus on the foundational skills that we know from business and industry talking to us are the core for most jobs. It is applied math. It is reading for information. So in other words, being able to refer to a technical manual, problem solve, and fix that high-tech piece of equipment. And then it is also the critical thinking, problem-solving skills that come with the use of equipment, charts and graphs. I mean, how many of us, live and breathe and die by the Excel spreadsheet? Being able to problem solve, again, and depending, broad spectrum of what you're involved in. You're going to have to chart sales growth, declines, in sales, rising costs. Those all are, again, problem-solving skills with the use of charts and graphs and those kinds of things. So those are the three areas that we focus on: applied math, reading for information, and then what we call locating information, the use of charts and graphs, again, in a workplace concept. That courseware is delivered, as I already mentioned, online, a web-based format, so it is accessible to all. The second key component of our program is to make sure an individual has the mastery of those skills. So there are a series of proctored assessments aligned with each of those subject areas, ensuring that the individual has, in fact, mastered those concepts. And then we offer a credential. So to validate that that student who is, in the 10th grade really, in fact, has grasped the concept, and it's not just so much what they have learned, but rather what they can do with what they have now learned. This credential speaks to business and industry by telling them, yes, Colleen has achieved these skills. And it speaks, again, side by side to the diploma, to what that individual can, in fact, do in the workplace. And in fact, on our credential, when you flip the opposite side, if you scored a 4 or a 5, we have a metric that we use, it actually bullets for that employer what that score of a 4 means, what the core competencies are that you have achieved. Down to a somewhat granular level, at this level it's 2-step math functions, this it's 3, this is at 4. So that, again, when an employer gets that credential, it's not just that, oh, I have a diploma from XYZ high school. What the heck does that mean? The standards, at least at this juncture in our academic system, vary very differently, not only from Arizona to Florida, but from Miami to Tallahassee, and from within the school district itself. So this provides a common measure, common language for business and industry to understand, and in their own context of what's important for their workplace, what this individual can do for them. So courseware, assessments to ensure mastery of skills, the credential that then is the proof of that individual's skills, and then finally we have a piece that is the true bridge from what we are doing in education to what that employer needs, which we call job profiling. So the question is, great, they go through, they take these tests, very much like the ACT. What's a 28? What's a 4? What's a 5? What does all that stuff mean? From an employer, it's rather daunting. So we make it very, very simple for employers. We've profiled about 15,000 jobs nationally. We can individually profile jobs for a specific company, come in and profile the job for a machinist. We sit down with incumbent workers in that job and their supervisors, and we develop a task list. What do you do as a machinist every day? What are the 10 or 15 or 20 key tasks? And then for each of those critical tasks, what skill sets do you need? Is it teamwork? Is it observation? Is it math? Is it reading? Or is it some combination of all of those things? And for each of those tasks, then we decide, okay, you got to have math. So we start determining at what level of math is critical for that job. So we sit down with those incumbent workers and say, well, on your job, do you have to do math problems similar to this? Level 1. Oh, no, much, much harder. Level 2, level 3, level 4, till we figure out that is essentially, to do my job every day, the kind of math that we do in our workplace every day. So then we are able to go back and say, to be a machinist, for this company, because every job is different. Every machinist, every forklift driver has a little bit different responsibility and skill set, so it's reasonable to understand that it probably needs to be based on the task within your particular organization. We are able to develop a general job profile. So for a machinist in my company, you need to have a 5 in math, 5 in reading, 5 in locating, and also because the nature of the work that we do, observation and the skills embedded in that component of our curriculum is also critically important. So that when, as an employer, I'm then looking for someone, and I have that stack of resumes, 800 now, because there's lots of people out of work that are wanting to be now machinists, I can cull through that stack of applications very quickly. And those that have the foundational skills, like we heard earlier this week, they become my top picks. Because I know I can train them. They are ready to train. I may not know how to run or repair that piece of equipment that you're going to hire me for, but in America, we train people on the job. So what education in our program is really, again, about is ensuring that I come to the table with those foundational skills. Now, again, it's not about drawing blood. You know, I'm going to move on to a program to learn to draw blood. This is that I can go into that training program to draw blood and complete that program because I have, again, those foundational skills to be successful in that ongoing training. Our program now, we're just in our 3rd year, well actually we're starting our 4th year. As Teresa mentioned in the introduction, we're approaching about 100,000 credentials statewide. Very exciting in a very, very short period of time. We've had our participants in our program have booked about 360,000 courseware hours. You know, along the lines of our digital learning initiatives, what is so wonderful about this, again, is if you have to just brush up on fractions, you can go in and just brush up on fractions. You do not have to spend an entire semester in a math remedial course if there's just fractions you need to work on. And the curriculum is built and it's adaptive to you. So you go in and it helps you determine where those points of weakness, those gaps are in your skills, lets you develop just those skills and in a very quick period of time move on. And so it is a nice blend of many of the reform initiatives that we have been talking about the last few days. We have about 550 employers that are fully engaged in the program, many, many more that are supportive of the program. And when I say fully engaged, what I mean is they are using this program as either a hiring, training, or incumbent worker promotional tool. So that gives added value to that credential. Credentials are great. But if a student or a job seeker walks in with this really cool piece of paper and the employer they're approaching knows nothing about it, then the paper really doesn't have much value. So it has been a big part of our program to reach out to business and industry, which also, again, fits the bigger reform package. We're bringing those that need our supply into the process. So employers are using it as a hiring tool. So on their job application or in their job posting, gold Florida Ready to Work credential preferred. Because again, I know that individual has the foundational skills I need to move into my workforce. Employers are using it as a promotional tool. We have a company in Florida, it's a firearms manufacturing company. They have voluntarily implemented this program in their workforce. And what they like about it is that individuals who are engaging are showing initiative. And as an employer, one of the first things you're always looking for is that person who wants to grow within your company and is willing to invest themselves in helping your company grow so they can grow. Concept being, learn more to earn more. And so these, across their entire workforce, machinists, assemblers, accountants, administrative staff, engineers are participating in this program, using the curriculum in the workplace to identify their skill gaps, improve and develop their skills, positioning themselves for promotion. And from an employer perspective, it's giving them an opportunity to, in a very voluntary but also quantitative way, be able to identify those folks within their workforce who are poised to help that company grow. We are implementing the program across the education and workforce delivery system. This session is Reinventing High School. Well, as Senator Crandall talked about, when we're breaking down the barriers of what high school really means, and you start looking at all the other delivery mechanisms of a high school level education and beyond, you have to look at your regional workforce board system, your community college system. It is not just the traditional brick and mortar high schools anymore. Your juvenile justice programs, your corrections programs, your community-based organizations, the church that has an after-school program for at-risk youth. That is where we have embedded our program. We have not tried to create a new delivery system. We have partnered with all of what you would traditionally believe to be your educational partners and embedded this program. In Florida, we're very blessed. Very strong legislative leadership. This program was created in Governor Bush's last term with very strong support and champions in both our House and our Senate. And so this program is fully funded by the state. So every high school, every community college, every technical center, correction program, juvenile justice program can avail themselves of this program at no cost. So there's no cost to the job seeker, there is no direct cost to the employer to participate. It's a no-brainer. And the way we've structured the program and the curriculum, again, this is going to be critically important from a funding perspective as we look down that digital learning path. How can you structure it in a way where it's cost efficient? And the state has essentially purchased an unlimited usage license for this curriculum. Whether we have one Floridian or all 18 million Floridians using it, there is a fixed cost. And so we have capacity to continue to let it grow. It is scalable. So our real charge now is to try to embed this program in every place we can possibly conceive to help skill up our workforce. Our big idea for the coming year is to try to focus on those that are receiving unemployment. I mean, intuitively, not everyone, but intuitively, especially among those that are chronically unemployed, we know there is a skill gap. And for them to be reemployed, they are going to have to skill up. And we have to be able to identify those people and get them the services they need. That's a drain on all of us as taxpayers if we don't. And so one of the initiatives that we're working on right now is because, again, it is a very simple, easy, accessible platform, being web-based, is to require every Floridian who receives an unemployment compensation check to log on and at minimum take the placement test for the Florida Ready to Work placement test. So we know for the first time what our unemployed workforce looks like. So from a public policy standpoint, we can craft policy that really addresses the root problem of unemployment versus just saying, here's your check. So really beginning to look at ways to, again, link education, workforce development, and ultimately at the end of the day, if we're able to skill up our workforce, it will be the catalyst for economic development in our state. So that is kind of the crux of Florida Ready to Work. I look forward to the discussion because I think we'll get some good ideas as we move forward. So Hannah, I think it's you, girl.
Good morning. I was struck listening, having made policy in California, Florida, DC, and now Texas, how fun it is to talk about reform packages. Because, I mean, when you think about being a policymaker or contributing to the policymaking process, the joy of actually running through an entire package all at once is thrilling, but rare. And I think often, I know walking away from even this time here at the summit, there's so many bold, audacious goals, and which one to do first, and how do they all work together. And I would like, in the next couple minutes, to take a very small policy initiative and kind of connect some dots on how it was implemented and how it's connected to other policies. My experience is that often, no policy stands in isolation and there is no silver bullet. And so thinking about what are those necessary policies all along the way that you need to have in place to connect the dots. And candidly, after you get to actually implement what you thought was going to be such an amazing endeavor, what are the pros and the cons? When you did X and you thought you were going to get Y, well, when you got Z, what do you do with that? And what might you do differently next time? So while I'll talk about what I think is a great policy initiative that's taking place in Texas right now, I will also unpack a little bit of some of the unintended consequences, if you will, and things that are still being grappled with. And I also will say that this is a very new policy, just implemented within the last year, but the groundwork has been laid over the last 5 years. And so as you think about creating change in your given state or geography, I would say that usually these policies don't stand in isolation, and if you're thinking strategically, you start connecting those dots, and that's when you see the real change and the exponential impact. Now that I am in the state of Texas, I'll just point out a few high-level things that I think really apply to any state across the nation to varying degrees. One being that our demographics are changing dramatically, and in fact, when it comes to the Hispanic community, there are approximately 47 million Hispanics in the United States today. 48% of them are in Texas and California. Right now, we know that 1 in 4 young people are Hispanics. This is a change. This is, and real policy. Hey, does this look different? Are there policy implications? In addition, we're all worried about college readiness, but let me link those two dots. In Texas, they are ranked 25th when it comes to college completion rates in the nation, not very good. And when it comes to our minority students, only 6% of Hispanics graduate with a bachelor's degree within 6 years of high school. So some things that are really stirring in Texas about how do we address this and what's possible. Then I'll superimpose, and we've heard a lot about this from the digital learning community, or conversation this morning, et cetera. Is there a role for the digital experience in college readiness, and what does it look like? And when we go, hey, I love the idea of School of One. We're not there right now. What can we do today that really is tangible, doable, and gets us started down the road? And also, what bridges that gap when it comes to affordable and accessible for all students? And certainly the digital world provides that opportunity. Having said all those things, like I said, I'd like to unpack a specific policy and then talk about some of the pros and cons and what the takeaways were for Texas to date, although it's very early. But I'll start with 2006. In 2006, the Texas legislature passed a law that required every high school in the state of Texas to offer at least 12 credit hours of college credit. Great policy. That could be in the format of AP, IB courses, or dual credit. One small issue, and each one of you will relate to this, it was what turned out to be an unfunded mandate. There were no dollars attached to it, so it was a great policy, and so it was implemented by some, not by others, et cetera, et cetera. Jump ahead, 2007, 1 year later, the Texas Virtual School Network was created via legislation. That was the idea behind it was to offer courses to Texas students across the board in high school, starting with high school. Great initiative, not a lot of funding behind that. And then we'll jump to 2009. In 2009, just last year, the Texas Virtual School Network was funded. And along with that funding, I'm going to hone in on the college readiness component. In the funding for that, they put some parameters around it. And here's where the kind of, I think this morning in the general session, somebody quoted Margaret Thatcher and said, "Don't tell me what, tell me how." So here's some of the hows that went into, hey, great, it's a virtual school network, and sounds wonderful, so what happens in that process? And there's some very instructive things that happened for Texas. Number one, they did require that if you were going to receive or take a course from the Texas Virtual School Network, you would not be reimbursed for taking that course unless you successfully completed it. So it was funded, free college from four-year state universities, from community colleges, but the funding does not come until you complete the course successfully, not just complete the course, successfully complete the course, meaning you're actually getting college credit. I think that was talked about a little bit in the digital learning conversation earlier. Let's look towards outcome-based incentives. I will say a couple of things that they embedded in the language and legislation around this. Number one, it had to be standards aligned. Great policy. We want all our courses. There's a lot of variability in online materials, and everybody's got a new online material. You've probably been exposed to multiple opportunities and providers, so making sure that their standards aligned. And finally, not only are they funded, they're funded at least 2 courses for free. The district that a student is attending that takes these is actually reimbursed $80 for pure administration purposes to make sure this goes through per student, per course. And then this is an interesting policy that if you're thinking you're going to fight some battles when it comes to implementing digital or distance learning, which if you don't think you're going to, you're wrong. Distance education is a very volatile topic for multiple reasons. In Texas, they said, you know what, we're going to give you full funding for your students, regardless if they're taking the class in their seat with a traditional teacher and a traditional model, or if they're taking courses online. Huge. It sounds like a little nice nuance somewhere out there. It costs money to do that, so we'll see if that remains after this next budget cycle. But what it did is diffuse a lot of the pushback that often comes from the traditional classroom side around you're taking away my funding, you're taking away my students. We don't want our students to take online because you're taking away seat time. Our funding formula is based on seat time. So some nuances that are definitely worth thinking about. That costs, like I said, but I just pointed out as a component that really diffused a lot of the politics to launch this initiative. Not long after launching, they experienced a 600% increase in their dual credit courses online. And I want to point out a couple things they saw that were real successes. Number one, the majority of the course taking was done by rural students, minority students. So when it comes to objectives, they really did see some real change in that arena. But at the same time, like I said, there were some interesting dynamics that I would point out that were probably what I would call unintended consequences. Let's talk about the standards aligned component. If your standards are not completely mapped out all the way through college, which some states have done that, but many have not, you may see a gap between, oh, these are standards aligned, my students are ready for college, they go to take a dual credit course that is actually a college course, and they are not ready. So there was a real interesting divide between the higher ed community and the high school or the secondary community around, wait a minute, what are we going to do about the mismatch of our standards? Totally unexpected. So I'll stop there. There's a lot of other components that were pros and cons, but I just want to point out that when we talk about exciting policies, and I'm all for them, there are definitely some when you kind of hunker down and think about all the things that are connected. There were 4 policy laws that had to be passed to make this one virtual schooling law have some bite and meaning. And there are definitely some unintended consequences in this great distance education initiative that are lessons to be learned and things to think about as you kind of labor down the road of implementing distance education and 21st century learning for your college students. So, thank you.
Okay, a couple of follow-up questions for our panelists, and then we'll open it up to the audience if you want to ask questions as well. We'll start with Senator Crandall. Senator, how are different schools using the Move On When Ready legislation?
It's interesting because we kept it kind of loose. We're seeing different schools in ways I never even envisioned. We have our first K-11 district in Arizona. As the superintendent presented the model to us, I never even fathomed a K-11 district would come out of Move On When Ready. But he just said, why do I need a senior year? I'm not going to plan for failure. I'm going to plan that every kid's going to pass the board exams, and we're just going to kick them out. That's been kind of exciting to watch and see what as the brain starts moving, what superintendents and teachers start thinking of.
And then what do you see as the obstacles to moving it out statewide?
We have, let me just ask, who in here took an online class in high school?
Those under 25.
Now, who took one, but it's interesting, watch as you, especially with educators, who took an online class for their bachelor's degree? Okay, now we have 3 hands.
It's all the ones that are under 30.
Do you know that's the biggest problem that we have as we move on, as we start getting into digital learning and moving at their own pace? All the people I'm speaking to are it's a foreign concept. Online learning, digital learning. They never took, I have never taken an online, except for my CPA license, continuing education. I have never taken one. It wasn't until one of my daughters took geometry that I kind of got my eyes open. That's my biggest obstacle, is just people afraid of what they have never experienced firsthand.
Thank you. Colleen, in marketing education reform, how do you sell a program like Florida Ready to Work?
It is a sales job. I mean, just like we sell widgets and online courseware, selling these new concepts is selling. Like Senator Crandall talked about, it's getting folks to think about things in a different way. And in Florida, our singular, I don't want to say, Governor Bush. You have to have a champion. You have to have someone that is not afraid to stand up and, really encourage change. So I think clearly the first step is finding a champion, a legislative champion, and/or someone in your, in the executive branch. And in our case, it was Governor Bush, and it was a very progressive-minded legislator in our House of Representatives, Joe Pickens, that picked up the mantle and really called for the change. I think with a program like Florida Ready to Work, another real powerful ally is business and industry. In our conversation yesterday, one of the questions asked the CEO panel is, well, why don't you guys get more engaged in this discussion or that discussion? You have to ask them. Governor Bush convened all the major industry groups, the Retail Federation, the Florida Chamber, the Manufacturing Association, Hospitality and Tourism, and had a dialogue very similar to the one we had the other day, was, what do you need? I hear you complaining. What do you need? What do you think is part of the solution? And so from the very beginning, they were there at the table helping build the coalition support for pushing this forward. And business and industry does, in the political process, have a very important power and voice. And so if you can harness that in affecting the change, because it's coming from the folks that are going to create these jobs and then look to fill these jobs. If they're telling you that's what they need to get the job done for economic development, that is a very, very powerful tool.
Okay, and then after you've sold the concept, how do you get the partners to engage? Your high schools, your workforce development partners? Yeah. Without a legislative mandate, what do you do?
Yeah, Florida Ready to Work is a completely voluntary program. And so respectfully, I know schools in particular have a lot of stuff they just have to do. There's a lot of have-to-dos. And so unfortunately, sometimes Florida Ready to Work and programs like it, Move On Ready, unless it's mandated, it's the great idea that sits on the corner of the desk. We all have those, right? Oh gosh, I picked something up at that conference, and you put it on the corner of your desk, and I'm gonna get to it, I'm gonna follow up on it, but it's all the other things that you gotta do. It's the big rock that you gotta move, but sometimes you focus on the little rocks because you just have to move those. And so in our case, unfortunately, a lot of times it does come down to money. Kind of along the same model that Hanna talked about, if you take the wind out of the sail and say, well, you can keep your seat time money to do this, that does speak volumes. We did not have that luxury in Florida, but we did tie a pay-for-performance type model to the program. So individuals that earn the credential, the institution that delivers that program to that individual does get a performance bonus. In Because of funding, it went from close to $70 to now being close to $15, but you now have individuals, you have institutions that have embedded this program into their curriculum, and so they see the value with it. And it's really interesting now, even though the funding stream has been reduced, we have school districts, they're saying, we would do this anyway, even if we didn't get the performance bonus, because now we realize that it's really important. The other would be, if because in this fiscal climate, the money's not always there, policy incentives. So if some of your states are seriously considering adopting the Florida and other models of the, A, B, C, D, F, build it into your grading formula. That is something actually we're lobbying to do now in Florida. In Florida this last year, our grading formula changed from being strictly based on the FCAT scores or our exit exam scores to a hybrid model of those exit exam scores and AP participation and other things. Our AP participation rate went off the charts. And it wasn't because all of a sudden everybody thought AP was a great thing. It's because there was that policy incentive built into the model to incentivize schools to place more emphasis on it. And so it did force the system to change how it looked at that program. So whether it's Florida Ready to Work, Move On Ready, the Texas model, or any other type of program like this that you're trying to innovate change, unfortunately in this climate, you can't count on people doing it just because it's the right and smart thing to do. There's got to be some incentive.
Thank you. Hanna, what are the key components for success in launching a 21st century college readiness initiative?
I think I mentioned a couple, which is making sure you tie your funding to an outcomes-based model. What I didn't mention is this also provided for, it was open competition. Providers could submit and have their courses reviewed by TEA, which was a part of the process. And as long as they were standards aligned, et cetera, they could participate, which really created some great competition among not just the public institutions, but also other providers. And I think that component of public-private is a really important piece to consider as you think about bringing in a distance education initiative. In addition, I mentioned the funding, and I agree that especially in this time with funding so tight, but I will add that that is a big, if you're trying to get something done from a policy perspective, if you can launch with funding and over time create a dynamic where you've got enough buy-in and enough dependency, candidly, that you slowly pull back that funding, your bang for the buck, no pun intended, is much greater, and your launch is much more deep-seated. But I will also say Texas also takes those AP, IB, and dual credit numbers and posts them, and does provide a kind of an accountability in regards to high schools and their districts. And so I do think in lieu of funds, some kind of transparency around that issue is key. One other thing I didn't mention, the guaranteed transferability. So when it comes to the dual credit courses, a really big component of that as well, in Texas, if you are part of the Common Core, the general education for the four-year institutions, there's guaranteed transferability throughout the state. So that does a couple of things. Number one, keeps your kids in Texas or wherever you may be. And when it comes to pipeline, and you talked a little bit about folks, leaving, this is a great way to ensure that you're going to keep your kids who are already proven college ready in your actual state and contributing to your economy. And then finally, one thing that isn't there and that I think is very important is thinking about, we focused on high school and the idea of being college ready, but I really believe if we're going to win this battle at the high school level, we need to start talking about middle schools. It's not too late by high school, but it's pretty late. And I'm a big believer in anyone and can do anything, but I also think when we're starting and they're already halfway down the march somewhere, it's a disservice to our kids. And we have not figured out the world of middle school. There's just no other way to say it. It seems to be a big black hole most of the time, but we need to start looking at it and looking at it very seriously. And interestingly enough, when it comes to success measures, it's our middle school students who are so engaged in technology, far more advanced than their teachers, et cetera. So it's a great place to begin, I think, in the distance education world to capture our middle school students. So those are some of the things for success.
Thank you. How about questions from the audience? Anybody have questions for our panelists today?
I'm Howard Stevenson, state senator from Utah. I just wanted to validate something that was said here by more than one of you about incentives rather than mandates or entitlements. We made the mistake, and it's a little bit unrelated to this, but we made the mistake in Utah of having a statewide educational technology initiative where we would supplement money for computers in the classrooms and moving into technology. We did this 12 years ago, and we're now dead last in computers per student because the school boards all backed off because it was an entitlement, and they thought, well, now it's the state's responsibility to provide computers for our classrooms. We are dead last in computers per student. But we've learned that incentives really do work, and if you make them competitive, you know, our schools are filled with professionals who really do want to prove that they're doing a good job. And when they smell a grant, I've learned that grants are their drug of choice. In fact,
Love that.
In fact, we had a program based on Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat. We realized we didn't have any kids learning Chinese or Arabic or any of the critical languages identified by the State Department and the Defense Department. So we, on a competitive basis, started with 20 high schools and said we have 20 grants of $6,000, just $6,000. And immediately, 20 high schools grabbed up those slots to start teaching Chinese and Arabic. And we've now scaled that. Our intention was to make it sort of universal for all of our schools. But now we have 10,000 students in Utah learning Mandarin Chinese. Amazing. We have 2,000 learning Arabic. That Chinese number is more than any state in the nation. And it's just because of a small, small incentive. Who would have thought that $6,000 would drive that kind of decision making? All these school boards had read the same book by Thomas Friedman we read, but not a single one of them initiated Chinese instruction on their own. But so I just want to echo what you're saying. Incentives work in a monopolistic system. We can't maybe change all of the things and make it a free market system because of all of the politics involved. But boy, when you put incentives in place, it can change the world.
Howard, I'm going to call you out real quick in front of this group because one thing, here we were talking about digital learning a few years ago. Howard said, hey, I live in Utah, we have a lot of rural areas. We have no quality preschools in all these rural towns. And so through your legislation passed the first virtual preschool program that I know of in the U.S. Wow. Go to, I was there just last week talking to some folks in Arizona about it, upstartutah.org, upstartutah.org. Fascinating to see what technology can do, even starting with 4-year-olds, and they track them, and kids who aren't ready for kindergarten, the local district will then intervene once the computers kind of tell them what kids are ready and what aren't. And
my granddaughter did that, by the way. They do it 45 minutes a day online, and she entered kindergarten, and they put her in the first grade reading group. And it wasn't because she's brilliant with her genetics and all that, but it was this Upstart program that was free to these kids who applied for it. And the ELL kids and the poor kids, we put it mostly in the poor homes, so those kids can be ready for kindergarten. But we wanted to avoid a traditional building-based preschool. That was our main motivation, but fortunately, delivering it at home through the internet is what's working.
Wow.
Thanks for that shout out.
Thank you.
And speaking of incentives, you know, we did a ton of stuff on Race to the Top, and we got jack squat. So sometimes you don't even need to give the money. You just pretend that you're going to give it.
I'd like to thank all of the panel. Janice Palmer with the School Boards Association, and my question is for Hanna. Appreciate the sentiment about the 100% funding for distance learning, but I think one of the things with school boards is that has there been any data or research about how much it actually costs? Because as we get into a time of more difficult budgeting and we can provide high quality, better education for kids, I think that may be a better driver about that it may be cost less than a traditional model.
No, there's no data on how much it costs comprehensively, but I mentioned this public-private, making sure you keep the possibility open for all to participate. And what we found is, in essence, there's the costing of the Texas Virtual School Network and maintaining it, and yes, there is a cost there, but the actual material, which is really where most of the cost comes in, and instruction, is then provided through folks who want to participate. So from that angle, I think there's a cost savings. But I will comment and say, from my experience going from going state to state, if you will, a bit, usually your first endeavor into the digital environment is not inexpensive. And often there's this kind of leap of investment, and then you begin to see the outcome over time. And I think initially, I remember when I first entered this space thinking, oh, this is so much less, because of course we're going to get economies of scale. We're going to reach everybody on the hemisphere with one course, and I believe that over time we are absolutely going to see that. But to be crystal clear and candid, and the initial investment of time and materials, et cetera, it's an investment. It is. So I don't have dollar figures for you, but it's easy to think, oh goodness, that's an immediate cost savings, and that's not the case initially.
Do you know if anyone has data about just how it patterns out? Because I think that's going to be a driver coming from the school side of showing what that investment produces at the back end. I think is going to be a bigger driver than kind of these little bridges of saying we'll give you some funding now and hopefully later on, of really getting people vested in the opportunity.
It would probably be worth looking and discussing that with the Texas Education Agency and the legislature on the initial funding to set it up.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Cheryl, and I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. I work with an organization that supports several initiatives for high schools, predominantly some middle school, to implement innovative programs. The area that I work in is early college, and so we are working diligently to expand that model in Indiana. One of the things that we've run into is there's been some challenge with regard to the higher ed partnerships that are needed, obviously, to make this happen. And they are talking about the costs that are incurred for them as a university to partner with the schools. And at this point, the partnerships that have existed have been voluntary. We're on the brink of some dual credit legislation and reducing the cost and mandating that. But could you talk a little bit in either of your cases about how you were able to bring your higher ed partners in with this being a mandate versus a voluntary kind of scenario?
Okay. This is something I'll be overly candid for a brief moment. I'm usually pretty candid, and say it was very difficult. And here's the interesting thing. If there had not been a private partnership where there were four-year state universities who partnered with a private entity to engage and get them going, and so therefore they were very aggressive, I'll just put that out there, very aggressive in engaging this initiative. The four-year and community colleges in Texas were not interested in this initiative, even with the funding. And there's politics. We could unpack this for days on all the implications and why. There was no incentive for them in their minds to participate, which is, the rational mind says that's insane. This is your pipeline. I mean, get them early. And no initiative on these. So I hate to discourage you, but you're not alone. And the way that Texas really spurred that on, if you will, was bringing in the private side, who moves very quickly. And as soon as the private side was introduced into the market, if you will, all of a sudden there were multiple community colleges and four-year state universities, first, who went to the legislature and said, you've got to stop this. And then second, when they were told we're not stopping, decided to get on board. So I hope it's different in other places. My experience is it's not, but it's worth the fight. Because ultimately, when they do come on board, you begin to form those relationships, et cetera, but you may have an initial hurdle, if you will.
Thank you. Just real brief, what we had to do is, and Hanna had mentioned it earlier in her comments, introduce competition. And what's funny though is who the competition became. We have, Maricopa County has the second largest community college system in the nation with 10 just great colleges, but 9 are traditional brick and mortar, and 1 is an online college whose enrollment has just been skyrocketing. And when the brick and mortar one said, oh, that may not work well for us, boy, the online one stepped right up. And before you knew it, everybody all of a sudden was, oh, never mind, we'll play. And once we introduced competition into it, then a lot of our problems went. But we did have to hold everybody harmless too. I hate to say it, that was a piece of it.
And are your high schools and colleges able to count those students toward their ADM or their count?
Yes and no. For capital construction, no, because we want the colleges to come to the high school campus. For everything else, they can. And we actually have worked it out to where a community college who comes to the high school actually gets a little bit more money. We make the district kind of share their money. Since the district doesn't have to hold the hand of that kid's junior and senior year, we still pay them junior and senior year. They split the money with the community college.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you. One more.
Dwayne Ankney, I'm a state representative from Montana. A question for Colleen. On your program, do the companies come in and talk to the students and talk to them about the skills and what they need those students to study?
In a county by county kind of delivery system, we have done some of that. It's not a standard component of the program because, again, we've tried to embed in existing delivery systems. So we embed in a workforce board that already has business alliances, and so they serve as the bridge to the business community. In Brevard County School District, though, for example, we've gone into that market with the school district and recruited businesses to be partners in this program. And as part of that shared partnership, we are bringing employers into the schools to talk with the students. This is also in our state. We have a very progressive career academy program. Each of our school districts are mandated legislatively to have at least one career academy, whether it be in finance or automotive or any technology. And so a lot of our school systems are bridging to the business community through those career academies. So, for example, in Brevard, one of their academies is a finance committee. One of our large state credit unions is a partner in that. So we work with them in bringing those individuals into the classroom to talk to those students about what it is like to be on that job every day, from teller to bank manager.
Well, I just a personal observation, being on the school board at our local school, is so often a teacher don't even know why they're teaching a course.
That's so true.
A welder needs algebra and geometry, but the teacher don't know that. I mean, we have a lot of jobs in southeast Montana, northern Wyoming, that's skilled jobs that's between 85 and 100,000+ a year. And something like what you're talking about is exactly what we've needed in that part of the country for a long time.
Well, in fairness, again, to business and industry, and I think they said this yesterday, it takes a lot of time and effort to engage business and industry because they too are very busy people. But generally speaking, if you ask, they will come and they will participate. And so it's really having a dedicated team that's willing to go out and make those connects.
We have had some success through trade schools, technical colleges, Wapton in North Dakota, trade school in Wyoming and Montana, in getting the companies, but to participate, Caterpillar, Rio Tinto, some big companies, but not at the high school level. And I really think that's where these students need to be motivated, stay in school, take math, take these core classes so you can succeed, you know?
Well, in our, again, just a quick follow-up on the whole idea of incentives. There's a real incentive for the business, the employer, to come into the high school, because if they can help craft the curriculum, then and build a pathway for students to move from that high school into their training program, into their workplace, they're getting a ready-made talent. And so we're seeing a lot of success with that in Florida, and that is a real carrot for employers.
Thank you all very much.
Can you, with me, give our panelists a round of applause, and we'll let's go.